Good morning. Page 640. Way down at the bottom here. So I'll just start with the last one again. In evaluating 1937 for the archipelago, we refused it, the tide of the crowning glory. But here I'm talking about freedom. We have to grant it this corroded crown of betrayal. One has to admit that this was the particular year that broke the soul of our freedom and opened it wide to corruption on a mass scale. Yet even this was not yet the end of our society. As we see today, the end never did come. The living thread of Russia survived, hung on until better times came in 1956, and it is now less than ever likely to die. The resistance was not overt, it did not beautify the epoch of the universal fall, but with its invisible warm veins its heart kept on beating, 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 beating. And in that awful time, when in apprehensive loneliness, precious photographs, precious letters and diaries were burned, when every yellowed piece of paper in the family cupboard all of a sudden gleamed out of a fiery fern of death, gleamed out like a fiery fern of death, and could not jump into the stove fast enough. In that awful time, what great heroism was required not to burn things up night after night for thousands and thousands of nights, and to preserve the archives of those who had been sentenced, like Florensky, or of those who were well known to be a disgrace, like the philosopher Fyodorov. And with a blazing underground anti-Soviet act of rebellion, the story of Lydia Chukhovskaya, Sofia Petrovna, must have seemed. It was preserved by Isidor Glikin in blockaded Leningrad. Feeling the approach of death, he made his way through the entire city to carry it to his sister and thus save it. Every act of resistance to the government required heroism, quite out of proportion to the magnitude of the act. It was safer to keep dynamite during the rule of Alexander II than it was to shelter the orphan of an enemy of the people under Stalin. Nonetheless, how many such children were taken in and saved? Let the children themselves tell their stories. Secret assistance to families did occur, and there was someone who took the place of an arrested person's wife who had been in a hopeless line for 3 days so that she could go in and get warm and get some sleep. And there was also someone who went off with a pounding heart to warn someone else that an ambush was waiting for him at his apartment and that he must not return there. And there was someone who gave a fugitive shelter, even though he himself did not sleep that night. We have already mentioned those so bold as not to vote in favor of the prom party executions, and there was also someone who went to the archipelago for defending his unobtrusive, unknown colleagues at work. And sons followed in footsteps of their fathers. The son of that Rozhansky, Ivan himself, suffered in defense of his colleague Kobolev. At a party meeting of the Leningrad Children's Publishing House, M.M. Meisner stood up and began to defend records in children's literature, and right then and there he was expelled from the party. And arrested. And after all, he knew what he was doing. In the wartime censorship office in Ryazan in 1941, a girl censor tore up the criminal letter of a frontline soldier whom she did not know, She was observed tearing it up and putting it into a wastebasket, and they pieced the letter back together and arrested her. She sacrificed herself for a distant stranger, and the only reason I heard about this was that it took place in Ryazan, and how many such cases were unknown. Nowadays it's quite convenient to declare that arrest was a lottery. Averbakh. Yes, it was a lottery all right, but some of the numbers were fixed. They threw out a general dragnet and arrested in accordance with assigned quota figures, yes. But every person who objected publicly, they grabbed that very minute, and it turned into a selection on the basis of soul, not a lottery. Those who were bold fell beneath the axe and were sent off to the archipelago, and the picture of the monotonously obedient freedom remained unruffled. All those who were purer and better could not stay in that society, and without them it kept getting more and more trashy. You would not notice these quiet departures at all, but they were in fact the dying soul of the people. So beautifully written. So beautifully written. Whoever says this isn't beautifully written hasn't read it. I don't know. Maybe it's a subject. I don't know how you don't find that moving. In a situation of fear and betrayal over many years, people survived unharmed. Sorry, this is number 7, corruption. People survive unharmed only in a superficial, bodily sense, and inside they became corrupt. So many millions of people agreed to become stool pigeons, and after all, if some 40 to 50 million people excuse me. And after all, if some 40 to 50 million people served long sentences in the archipelago during the course of the 35 years up to 1953, including those who died, and this is a modest estimate, being only 3 or 4 times of the population of Gulag at any one time, and after all, during the war, the death rate there was running 1% per day, then we can assume that at least every 3rd or at least every 5th case was a consequence of somebody's denunciation, and that somebody was willing to provide evidence as a witness. All of them, all of those murderers with ink are still among us today. Some of them brought about the arrest of their neighbors out of fear, and this was only the first step. Others did it for material gain, and still others, the youngest at the time, who are now on the threshold of a pension, betrayed with inspiration out of ideological considerations, and sometimes even openly. After all, it was considered a service to one's class and to expose an enemy, the enemy. And all these people are among us, and most often they are prospering, and we still rejoice that they are our ordinary Soviet people. Cancer of the soul develops secretly too, and it strikes that particular part of it where one expects to find gratitude. Fyodor Peregud gave Misha Ivanov food and drink. Ivanov was out of work, and so Peregud got him a job at the Tambov railroad car repair factory and taught him the trade. He had no place to live, so he let him move in with him, like a relative, and then Mikhail Dmitrievich Ivanov sent a denunciation to the NKVD accusing Fyodor Peregud of praising German equipment at dinner at home. You have to know Fyodor Peregud. He was a mechanic, a motor mechanic, a radio operator and repairman, an electrician, a watchmaker, an optician, a foundryman, a model maker, a cabinet maker, master of up to 20 different skills. In camp, he opened up a shop for precision mechanics. When he lost his leg, He made himself an artificial limb, and so the police came to take Peregrine and took his 14-year-old daughter to prison too. And M.D. Ivanov was responsible for all that. He came to the trial looking black, and what that meant was that a rotting soul sometimes emerges in the faith. But soon after, he left the factory and began to work for state security in the open, and subsequently, because of his lack of ability, he was made a fireman. In a corrupt society, ingratitude was an everyday, run-of-the-mill emotion, and there was almost nothing surprising in it. After the arrest of the plant breeder, Fiat Markin, the agronomist A.A. Soloviev quite safely stole the variety of wheat which Markin had developed, Taiga 49. When the Institute of Buddhist Culture was destroyed, all its leading personnel were arrested, and its head, academician Sherbatsky, died. His student, Kalinov, came to his widow and persuaded her to give him the books and papers of the deceased, otherwise things would go badly, because the Institute of the Buddhist Culture turned out to be a spy center. Having taken possession of these works, he published part of them, as well as the work of Vostrikov, under his own name, and thus acquired a reputation. There are many scientific reputations in Moscow and in Leningrad that were also built on blood and bones. The ingratitude of students, cutting in a skewball path through our science and technology of the 30s and 40s, had a quite understandable explanation. Science passed out of the hands of the real scientists and engineers and into the hands of callow, greedy climbers. Oh my goodness, how much of this feels like it applies today? Pardon me, sorry. But now it is quite impossible to trace and enumerate all these appropriated works and stolen inventions. And what about the apartments taken over from those arrested? And what about their stolen possessions? And during the war, did not this savage trait manifest itself as nearly universal? If there was someone bereaved, bombed out, their home burned down, or being evacuated, the neighbors who had survived the disaster, plain Soviet people, tried in those very moments to profit from those who were stricken. The aspects of corruption are varied, and it is not for us to cover them all in this chapter. The overall life of society came down to the fact that traitors were advanced and mediocrities triumphed, while everything that was best and most honest was trampled underfoot. Who can show me one case in the whole country from the 30s to the 50s of a noble person casting down, destroying, driving out a base troublemaker? I affirm that such a case would have been impossible, just as impossible for any waterfall to fall upward as an exception. After all, no noble person would turn to state security, but for any villain it was always right there at hand, and state security would not stop at anything. Once it didn't stop, and what it did to Nikolai Vavilov. So why should the waterfall fall upward? This easy triumph of mean people over the noble boiled in a black, stinking cloud in the crowded capital, but it stank too, even way up north, beneath the honest Arctic storms. And the polar stations, so beloved in the legends of the 30s, there the clear-eyed giants of Jack London should have been smoking pipes of peace at the Arctic station of Domashny Island off Severnaya Zemlya. There were just 3 people, the non-party chief of the station, Alexander Pavlovich Babbage, a much-honored old Arctic explorer, the manual laborer, yeoman, who was the only party member and who was also the party organizer of the station, and the Komsomol member, the Komsomol organizer, the meteorologist Goryachenko, who was ambitiously trying to shove the chief aside and take his job. Goryachenko dug around among the chief's personal possessions, stole documents, and made threats. The Jack London solution would have been for the other two men to simply shove this scoundrel down through the ice. But no. Instead, a telegram was sent to Papanin in the North Sea Route headquarters about the necessity of replacing this employee. The party organizer, Yeryomin, signed the telegram, but then he confessed to the Komsomol member, and together they sent Papanin the party Komsomol telegram, just the opposite in content. Papanin's decision was, the collective has disintegrated, remove them to the mainland. They sent the icebreaker Sadko to get them. On board Sadko, the Komsomol man lost no time at all, and provided the ship's political commissar with materials. Babbage was arrested on the spot. The principal accusation was that he intended to turn the icebreaker Sadko over to the Germans. That same icebreaker on which they were all now sailing. Once ashore, Babbage was immediately put into a preliminary detention cell. Let us imagine for one moment that the ship's commissar was an honest and reasonable person, and that he had summoned Babbage and heard the other side of the question. But this would have meant disclosing a secret denunciation to a possible enemy, and in that case, Goryachenko, through Papanin, would have also procured the arrest of the ship's commissar. The system worked faultlessly. Of course, among individuals who had not been brought up from childhood in the pioneer detachments, the Komsomol cells, there were souls that retained their integrity. At a Siberian station, a husky soldier, seeing a tradeload of prisoners, suddenly rushed off to buy several packs of cigarettes and persuaded the convoy guards to pass them on to the prisoners. And in other places in this book we describe similar cases, but this soldier was probably not on duty and was probably on leave. And he did not have the Komsomol organizer of his unit near him. If he had been on duty in his own unit, he would not have made up his mind to do it, because he would have caught hell for it. Yes, and it was even possible that in the other situation the military police would have called him to account for it. 8. The lie as a form of existence. Whether giving into fear or influenced by material self-interest or envy, people can't, nonetheless, become stupid so swiftly. Their souls may be thoroughly muddied, but they still have a sufficiently clear mind. They cannot believe that all the genius of the world has suddenly concentrated itself in the head with a flattened, low-hanging forehead. They simply cannot believe the stupid and silly images of themselves which they hear over the radio, see in films, and read in the newspapers. Nothing forces them to speak the truth in reply, but no one allows them to keep silent. They have to talk, and what else but a lie? They have to applaud madly, and no one requires honesty of them. And if in Pravda, on May 20th, 1938, we read the appeal of workers in higher education to Comrade Stalin, quote, heightening our revolutionary vigilance, we will help our glorious intelligence service, headed by the true Leninist, the Stalinist People's Commissar Nikolai Ivanovich Yezhov, to purge our higher educational institutions as well as all our country of the remnants of the Trotskyite Bukharinite and other counter-revolutionary trash, unquote. We certainly do not conclude that the entire meeting of 1,000 consisted solely of idiots, but merely of degenerate liars, according to their own arrest on the morrow. The permanent lie becomes the only safe form of existence in the same way as betrayal. Every wag of the tongue can be overheard by someone, every facial expression observed by someone. Therefore, every word, if it does not have to be a direct lie, is nonetheless obliged not to contradict the general common lie. There exists a collection of ready-made phrases, of labels, a selection of ready-made lies, and not one single speech, nor one single essay or article, nor one single book, be it scientific, journalistic, critical, or literary, so-called, can exist without the use of these primary cliches. In the most scientific of texts, it is required that someone's false authority or false priority be upheld somewhere, and that someone be cursed for telling the truth. Without this lie, even an academic work cannot see the light of day. And what can be said about those shrill meetings and trashy lunch break gatherings where you are compelled to vote against your own opinion, to pretend to be glad over what distresses you, be it a new state loan, the lowering of peace rates, contributions to some tank column, Sunday work duties, or sending your children to help on a collective farm, and to express the deepest areas in anger about which you couldn't care less, some kind of intangible, invisible violence in the West Indies or Paraguay. Wow. Wow. In prison, Tenno recalled with shame how 2 weeks before his own arrest he had lectured the sailors on the Stalinist constitution, the most democratic in the world, and of course not one word of it was sincere. There was no man who has typed even one page without lying. There is no man who has spoken from a rostrum without lying. There is no man who has spoken into a microphone without lying. But if only it had all ended there. After all, it went further than that. Every conversation with management, every conversation in the personnel section, every conversation of any kind with any other Soviet person called for lies, sometimes head-on, sometimes looking over your shoulder, sometimes indulgently affirmative. And if your idiot interlocutor said to you face to face that we were retreating to the Volga in order to decoy Hitler further, or that the Colorado beetles had been dropped on us by Americans, it was necessary to agree. It was obligatory to agree, and a shake of the head instead of a nod might well cost you resettlement in the archipelago. Remember the arrest of Chupenyov in Part 1, Chapter 7. But that was not all. Your children were growing up. If they weren't yet old enough, you and your wife had to avoid saying openly in front of them what you really thought. After all, they were being brought up to be Pavlik Morozovs, to betray their own parents, and they wouldn't hesitate to repeat this achievement. And if the children were still little, then you had to decide what was the best way to bring them up, whether to start them off on lies instead of the truth, so that it would be easier for them to live, and then to lie forevermore in front of them too, or to tell them the truth with the risk that they might slip up and that they might let it out, which meant that you had to instill in them from the start that the truth was murderous, that beyond the threshold of the house you had to lie, only lie, just like Papa and Mama. Oh, my God. The choice was really such that you would rather not have any children. The lie as a continuing basis of life. A young, intelligent woman, A.K., who understood everything, came from the capital to teach literature in a higher education institute in the provinces. Her security questionnaire had no black marks on it, and she had a brand new candidate's degree. In her principal course, she saw she had only one party member and decided that this girl was the one who was bound to be the stool pigeon. There had to be a stool pigeon in every course. Of that, A.K. was convinced, and so she decided to become all buddy-buddy with this party member and pretend friendship with her. Incidentally, according to the tactics of the archipelago, this was a complete miscalculation. What she should have done, on the contrary, was to paste a couple failing grades on her at the start, and then any denunciations would have looked like sour grapes. And so these two used to meet outside the institute and exchanged photographs. The girl carried A.K.'s photograph around in her party card case. During holiday time, they corresponded tenderly, and in every lecture, A.K. tried to play up the possible evaluations of her party student. 4 years of this humiliating pretense went by. The student completed her course, and by this time, her conduct was a matter of indifference to A.K., so she made her first return to visit the school. When she made her first return, A.K. received her deliberate coldness. The offended student demanded her photographs and letters back, and exclaimed the most dolefully amusing thing about it was that she probably wasn't a stool pigeon. I finished my degree. I will never cling to this pitiful institute the way you do. And what lectures you gave, as dull as dishwater. Yes, by impoverishing everything, bleaching it out, and clipping it to suit the perceptions of a stool pigeon, A.K. ruined her lectures, and she was capable of delivering them brilliantly. As a certain poet said, it wasn't a cult of personality we had, but a cult of hypocrisy. Here, too, of course, one has to distinguish between degrees. Between the forced, defensive lie and the oblivious, passionate lie of the sort our writers distinguish themselves at most of all. The sort of lie in the midst of whose tender emotions Marietta Shiginian could write in 1937 that epoch of socialism had transformed even criminal interrogation. The stories of interrogators showed that nowadays the persons being interrogated willingly cooperated with them, telling everything that was required about themselves and others. And the lie has, in fact, led us so far away from normal society that you cannot even orient yourself any longer. In its dense, gray fog, not even one pillar can be seen. All of a sudden, thanks to footnotes, you figure out that Yakubovich's book, In the World of the Outcasts, was published, although under a pseudonym, at the very same time the author was completing his sorest hard labor sentence and being sent off into exile. Well now, just add that up and compare it with us. Compare that with the way my belated and shy novella managed to get out in the open by a miracle, and then firmly lowered the barrier, bolted things up tightly, and locked the locks. And now it is forbidden to write not merely about something taking place in the present, but even about things that took place 30 and 50 years ago. And we will never, and will we ever read about them during our lifetime? We are destined to go to our graves still immersed in lies and falsehood. Moreover, even if they offered us the chance to learn the truth, would our free people even want to know it? Y.G. Oxman returned from the camps in 1948 and was not rearrested, but lived in Moscow. His friends and acquaintances did not abandon him, but helped him. But they did not want to hear his recollections of camp. Because if they knew about that, how could they go on living? After the war, a certain song became very popular. The noise of the city cannot be heard. No singer, even the most mediocre, could perform it without receiving enthusiastic applause. The chief administration of thoughts and feelings did not at first grasp what was going on, and they allowed it to be performed on the radio and on the stage. After all, it was Russian, and it had a folk motif. And then suddenly they discovered what it was all about. And they immediately crossed it off the permitted list. The words of the song were about a doomed prisoner, about lovers torn apart. The need to repent existed still, and it stirred. And people who were steeped in lies could at least applaud that old song with all their hearts. Wow. There's just so much. There's so much in here that you can see society moving that way, and not even from above, but from, people and themselves, because they think they're righteous. Oh, there's so much in here. I gotta reread this again. There's so much in here to pull out. I make lots of them into shorts. I hope you've seen that. So you can catch parts of each chapter and get a sense of what it is and whether or not you'd enjoy it. This one, everybody has to read this chapter. They really have to. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day.